Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Liege in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 51, 46.1, Harpstring Moon, Rebellion of the Foolish V. Shay groaned beside her as they stood before the gates of a lower noble. You. No, he said. What? She asked as he handed him a mask. I would have preferred to go on an opera rather than attend in a boring and stiff ball such as this in a room full of snotty and pompous nobles, Shay said. That's an apt description, she said. Am I wrong? Shay asked. No, that's actually quite a spot-on description of Adrestian nobility, she said with a nod. You attended a lot of balls since the end of the war, Shay said. Yeah, she said, but I usually attended balls that was thrown by Faergus nobility and also from Alliance's nobility, she said. All of them is admittedly quite loose, she said. Except for Gloucester? Shay asked. Except for Gloucester, she said with a nod, remembering how she was thrown off the loop upon attending a ball that Lawrence have thrown, commemorating his engagement with Leonie. You've been in a ball thrown by a Gloucester before? She asked. Yes, Shay said. Duke Gloucester absolutely loved throwing some of the most opulent and grandiose of parties in all of Alliance, he said, and that, milady, is where I was forced to learn how to dance and, Shay said before clearing his throat. Proper etiquette, he said, mimicking an overly pompous noble, probably Lawrence. Or your lack thereof, she said with a giggle. Shay gasped and clutched his chest as though she just punched him in the face. How could say such a thing? He asked. I'm quite well-mannered, just so you know, milady, Shay stated rather pompously. Why, I eat sandwiches with a fork after cutting it into tiny elegant pieces, he said. Oh, classy, she said with a giggle. And I drink my tea with my pinky up in the air to make the world known of my elegant and refined way of drinking tea, Shay said as he pretended to drink tea with his pinky up. A good use of a pinky, she said with a nod. I demand apologies from you, milady, Shay said as he wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her close. And how do you propose that I do that, Sir Shay? She asked, raising an amused eyebrow at him. A duel? She asked. Really? Shay asked hopefully. Seriously? She asked as she looked at him and raised an eyebrow at him. What? Shay asked. Isn't dueling each other to exhaustion is another way to form camaraderie with others? He asked. Are you sure you are born in Leicester and not in Faergus? She asked. So, is that a no? Shay asked, looking like a kicked puppy. I was expecting along the line of treating you to dinner, but sure, let's duel instead, she said. Really? Shay asked as he looked like an excited puppy now. She swear that she can see his tail wagging in excitement. Yes, she said with a slight giggle. Shay hummed, satisfied by her answer. Anyway, she said as they are nearing the gates, you know the best side of attending balls in Adrestia? She asked. The food? Shay asked. The food, she said with a nod. Then, what are we waiting for? Shay asked. Let's pig out, he said. Yes, she said as she followed him inside. Self-control, Suthies said. We are on a mission, you two dum-dum, Arvel said. But their partner's protest are ignored as their heads was filled with delightful delicacies the nobles have prepared. As expected of an empire noble, the ball is as opulent as any empire's ball are. Several golden crystal chandeliers hung overhead, boasting the wealth and the power this once proud and influential house had, even if what they are showing off to the eyes of the public are nothing but the husk of their once and glorious great house. Hey, Your Grace, Shay whispered to her. Look, he said before showing her a sandwich. What? She asked. Want me to make it sing? Shay asked. Don't do the sandwich opera now, she said in exasperation. Too late, Shay said as he prepared his sandwich. The curtain is about to rise in a heads up, he said. What? She asked. It's an aria, Shay said happily before clearing his throat. Once there is a little sandwich, drunken on a mustard, drowning in a salad, making it rain ketchup, he sung as he moved the upper part of the sandwich to mimic his singing, stumbled PON on a party and now he is going to be, Shay sung before eating the sandwich, a decoration in my belly, he finished after swallowing his food. She let out a soft laugh as she shook her head at him. That's atrocious, she said with soft giggle. Shay just smiled in triumph. It isn't easy, he said with a shrug of his shoulders, since it never failed to make you laugh or smile, Shay said. Didn't know you like the sound of my laughter enough to make a fool of yourself, she said softly. You know what the physician says, Shay said, a laughter from you keeps me happy every day, he said, and being happy contributed quite a lot with my health, he said. There is actually a theory about that, Shay said. Oh, she asked in amusement. I'm serious, Shay said with a smile on his face. Let's hear it, Professor, she said with an amused smile. Shay cleared his throat. You see, my young ward, he said in a weirdly accurate imitation of Hanneman's voice, you see there is a book that I read about this certain phenomenon is called, A Goddess Smile, proves to be an effective medicine to cure all symptoms of sadness, anger, and even violence, Shay said. I mean look at the result this phenomenon have on the knights, he said as he looked at her. She just giggled at the explanation. That's dumb, she said. Say what you will, milady, Shay says, but it is a very effective medicine for any knight around the monastery, especially on this guy, he said as he points to himself. She just let out a laugh before she hit his shoulder lightly. Stop that, she said. Shay just laughed along with her. You too, eh? Man said as he approached them. It seems like you two are having a joyous of times, the man said. Mind if I join you too? He asked. She smiled her so-called public smile. It would out honor, she said pausing as she waited for him to pompously give her the name of his proud house. Count Hilfiger said, a proud house within Aegir territories, he said. This seems interesting. Maybe the man knows something about the rebellion, Suthies said. Press him further but be discreet about it, all right. Suthies said. Got it, she said. Isn't it glorious? Helfiger asked with a sigh. All of the houses of Adrestia came to one place in order to show support of the rebellion against the king of this so-called United Fodlan, he said. Yes, she said with a smile. Quite glorious indeed, she said. Tell me, my lord, she said. What is it, milady? Hilfiger asked eagerly. Why are we organizing a rebellion against the king? She asked. No one informed you? Hilfiger asked. I was only given a brief explanation about how this is for the sake of restoring the empire to its former glory, she said. Then, that's all there is to it, milady, Hilfiger said. All of this is for the sake of our independence as a country, he said. The Adrestian Empire refused to bow down to a northern king Moriso before a Bladdid king, Hilfiger said with so much disgust. You seem to hate the king, she noted. I wonder why is that? She asked. Nothing more than that they are mere barbarians, not so different to their neighbors from the north, Hilfiger said. They enjoyed bloodshed just as much and they are all wild animals underneath their polished and handsome skins, he said. I can't help but agree with you, my lord, she said as she made a mental note to apologize to Dmitri later. Seems like he isn't one to have a more vital information about the rebellion, she thought. Well, milady, Hilfiger said. I must get going now, he said. My friends are waiting for me, Hilfiger said, we are to discuss the next step towards the freedom of Adrestia and of the goddess from the clutch of that wicked heretic they called the Archbishop, he said venomously before giving her a curt nod before he left them alone. Or maybe he do have some knowledge, she thought. Should we follow him? Suthies asked. She nods before she turned to Shay. Do what you have to, Shay said, and I'll gather what I can hear, he said. I'll be right back, she said. Be careful, Shay said. I always am, she said before she disappeared into the crowd. She managed to follow the man without anyone being the wiser. That room, she muttered as she saw the man entering an opening on the wall, a secret passage. She muttered as she waited for a few moments to be able to investigate. A secret room, Suthies said, a perfect hideout for a secret rendezvous with your mistress, she said. She went out of hiding and walked towards the wall. You are reading too much romance novels, she said. Was it my fault that my vessel is the one that kept reading it for, Suthies said before she cleared her throat. Research, she said. It is for research, she said as she feel around the wall for some sort of a switch or an opening before her finger managed to nudge something. Dunno, she said as she saw a hole in the wall. Found it, she said. Shall we, your holiness? She asked Suthies. I must say that I always approve of eavesdropping, Suthies said. That's just because you just wanted to find out the latest gossip, she said. I do like myself a good gossip, Suthies said, especially if it is talked over tea, she said. You do know that there is a commandment in the scriptures that says that gossiping is a sin, right? She said. My little Ceros is worse than me, Suthies said. Like mother like daughter, I guess, she said. Suthies merely chuckled. Okay, settle down, Suthies, she said as she entered the open passageway. We are going into the rat's nest, she said. He looked at the bodies dancing across the glittering and bright ballroom. Dressed in fine clothes and glittering jewels, showing off the status that no longer hold any meaning in New Order of United Fodlan. Flaunting the ill-gained wealth they have gained on years and years, oppressing the weak and stealing the well-earned coins of the lower classes in the name of the so-called improvements of their lifestyle, when in reality it is for sake of furthering themselves in life by trampling the weak beneath their heels. Greetings there, a woman said. Strapping young man, she said. He turned his head to meet whoever this stranger is and imagine his surprise to see the same woman from yesterday. He instantly grimaced as soon as he saw her. Fancy seeing you here, the woman sultry said. Yes, he said sarcastically. Quite fancy, he said. What do you want? He asked. Is that any way to speak to a lady? The woman asked. Didn't know I was speaking to one, he said. The woman scoffed at his response. Then, I will take my leave, he said before turning his back from the woman. Let me guess, the woman said. You are here to gather information on the rebellion, she said. He froze in his tracks. I thought so, the woman said. He turned around to face her once more, glaring at her through the mask. I might have some information you wanted in regards of the Lord that I'm, the woman said as she come closer to him. Servicing, she said as she fiddled with the button of his shirt. I assume you want something in return, he said. The woman smiled at him. As soon as she managed to find a good spot to hide, she unfreezed time and stay put to listen in on the noble's conversation. I heard that our letter just disappeared one day, one man said. I say that he is a traitor, another one said. I mean, how else would you explain why the letter that is containing all of our plans to disappear so suddenly and in his hands at that, he said. The rest of the men hummed in agreement. So, what do you suppose is the plan now? Another nobleman asked. The same as always, the nobleman said. By this time around, the Archbishop and the King would probably know about the current plan, and they must have already concocted a plan to counter ours, he said. He makes a fine point, Suthies stated, if one's plan goes missing before it even made it to their desired receiver, she said. She nods. True, she said, but they seemed to have forgotten about me, she said, me, whom they revered as a tactician greater than Claude or Edelgard or even Hubert combined, she said. Sotheis chuckled at that. Then, we decide that we don't change our plan, the other nobleman said. Yes, the others agree. May I speak? Another one asked. You may, the other man said. How about out escape route to Ordelia going to Goneril territories? The man asked. What about it? The other noble asked. Well, since our messenger was intercepted by the Knight of Ceros 2 moons ago, he said, our escape route from Agyr to Almira might need some alterations, he said. Now, they are dragging Almira into this. She said, I didn't peg them to be this ambitious, but I digress, she said. Sotheis hummed in agreement. Then, what of our allies? The man asked. What about them? The other man asked. They have been in such a state of panic since the goddess have manifested last week, he said. They wanted to be out of Fodlan at least for the duration of this moon, the other man said. They are really associated with those slitherers, huh? She thought. Didn't they already learn their lesson from Duke Agyr? Nothing comes good when involving those slitherers. Look what happened. Edelgard, a girl who was subjected to their cruel experiment, was driven to madness. Thus, she become easy to manipulate by those heathens. And what is it with the Empire and those slitherers? Despite their first emperor's affection towards my grandmother, the Empire sure hate her, she thought. I think that stems from the fact that Ceros favored those from Atlanta rather than those from Attica, Sotheis said. I wonder why, she muttered. We can take Terrigan territory to sneak them out of Fodlan, and by Derdriu, we'll take them by boat to Almira, the other man said. I think we can notify Hilda and Claude of this, she thought. The opera next week, another noble said. What of it? Another asked. We'll meet there to discuss any further plans of ours, the man said. Well, I'll be, she said, guess, we'll be attending an opera in 3 days, Sotheis, she said. Seems like it, Sotheis said as she frees time. We should head back, she said as she left the room. Chapter 52, 46.1, Harpstring Moon, Rebellion of the Foolish Six. She keeps tossing and turning later that night as she listened to the noise of the night. Even late at night, Inver is still a lively city full of drunks and indulgers, but that is not what is keeping her awake. She is used to noises. No, the noise is not what is keeping her awake, but the absence of the warmth beside her. She really can't sleep as she wallow in this unknown emotion that seems to burn through her heart, wishing she can tear whoever this noblewoman that keeps on taking him away from her. As she navigate through the crowded room full of snotty nobles, searching for the purple hair that she have grown fond of through the sea of unknown faces as the clock is close to striking on midnight, indicating to her that they should leave. She managed to spot him on the balcony. As she went out to the warm air of Harpstring Moon, she softly closed the glass door behind her and sneaked behind him. An idea of mischief have blossomed inside her mind as the purple-haired knight seems lost in his own world, admiring the starry night above. She walked towards him as quietly as possible before she covered his eyes. Sneaking around in this grand and noble home, she said, I dare say that you are having a rendezvous here, young sir, she said as she removed her hands away from his eyes before them around him. To be woefully honest with you, milady, she said amusedly before taking her hand and kissing it, I went out here to clear my head of woeful thoughts, he said. I nary not to imagine that an enchantress such as yourself will find me in my times of need, she said before she moved in front of him, putting herself between his arms. Might you be the one that will rid of me this woeful thoughts and take me to a place of momentary relief from my cares? He asked. Quite a refined vocabulary you have there, Sir she said as she brought her arm around his waist before she placed herself between his arm. I did my best, she said. So, you learned how to read? She asked, noticing that some words is something one can pick up by hanging around the nobility quite often, or by books or even etiquette classes, but a mercenary who might or not be able to read or write like any other common folk. My stepmother taught me how to, she said, as well as how to write, he said with a soft and fond smile on his face with a tinge of sorrow and nostalgia. She is hoping for me to become a great poet or author someday, she said wistfully. But you didn't, she muttered. I didn't, she said. Instead I pick up arms and learn how to wield a sword after her death, he said. She took note of his somber tone and she leaned into his chest before she rubbed the spot over his heart as softly and as gently as she can in an attempt to alleviate whatever is making his heart ill at ease. She responded as he leaned his forehead on the crown of her head before she heard him inhaling softly. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, she said as she listened to the calming beat of his heart. No, she said, you deserve to know, he said. After my stepmother died, he said before taking a deep breath, I was kicked out of my village, he said, and I was left to fend for myself, out in the wilderness where nowhere is safe, and, she said as he let out a very heavy sigh, I was all alone, he said softly. She just snuggled deeper into his chest. Thank you, Your Grace, she muttered. I didn't do anything, she said softly. She just let out a soft chuckle as a response. What? She asked as she met his eyes. Nothing, she said as he pressed his forehead on hers while he laughed softly. She found that she rather liked this gesture. She don't know why she likes it when he did this, but she love it nevertheless. That doesn't sound nothing, she said. I just felt happy all of a sudden, she said. That is all, he said. What do you want? She asked amusedly. Why do you ask? She asked as she started to intertwine their fingers to one another. You are quite, she said as she admired how nicely their hands fit with each other, affectionate today, she said as played with his hand, loving the feeling of his rough and callous skin. It's quite weird, she said. She was quiet as she continued to play with his hand. She called out in confusion at his sudden silence. Your Grace, she started. Actually, there is something that came up, he said. Go on, she said. Someone offered information to me tonight, she said. And what is the catch? She asked. She was quiet again. She called out again. I warm her bed for tonight, she said. She abruptly turned to face him. And I agree, she said. She turned to the side again, the space where she is supposed to be. You are uneasy, Suthies stated from her place on the nightstand. She didn't reply. He is only doing this for the sake of the mission, Suthies said. He isn't going to decide to leave you all of a sudden, she said. Knowing that isn't enough to make this feeling go away, it's driving her mad. What are they doing now? Is he showering her his love all night? Is he holding her in his arms? Joining his body with hers? Is her line of thought was interrupted by the soft creaking of their door, followed by the sound of the footsteps she have grown to love and hate. Hate it when he leaves. Love it when he returns home to her. Done already? She asked in a scathing voice. You are still awake? She asked as he removed his boots. I can't sleep, she stated as she turned her back from him. Why are you sulking? She asked. Why do you say that? She asked. Do I look like I'm sulking? She asked. Not at all, she said, but for some reason, I felt like you are somehow, he said. Angry at me, she said. I'm not, she said before she turned around to face him. So, how did it goes? She asked, not really sure if she wanted to know. As promised, she said. She gave me what she knows, he said as she faced him again and was greeted by the sight of his back bare as he already removed it earlier to be able to change into a more comfortable clothing, your grace. She called out in confusion as he felt her finger tracing any scars that was visible by the light of moon, bathing She in its silver light. To her eyes, he looked almost ethereal, and damn tempting, especially since something in her mind seems to send her some of the most tantalizing images of She, and yes, those images can make even Suthies blush, and she is sure the pendant on the nightstand is shining brighter than usual. Keep talking, she said as she keeps tracing and retracing the scars on his back. She started as his voice cracked a little as he felt her nail scratching lightly on his back, drawing some sort of an imaginary pattern on it. She told me that the rebels' army is trying to transport some sort of, She said nervously, weapons towards Goneril and in Almira, he said. What type of weapon? Suthies asked. Those weird barrels and those blueprints for that weird giant javelins of yours, Arvel said. Apparently, they are transporting it out of Shambhala, he said. What is Shambhala? She asked. I heard that name before from Rhea, but no one can give a very accurate description of it. All they told me is that it's an underground city, she said. Wait, Suthies said, did you just call a beautiful city such as Shambhala as an underground city? She asked in confusion. Well, yes, she said, I mean, that's what Shambhala is, right? She said. No. Suthies said slowly, Shambhala is located between the mountains of Faergus, between the dry deserts of the Serengian borders and of the cold and tempestuous territory known as Gautier, she said. The original Shambhala was destroyed during the fighting before the 100 Days Massacre, Suthies, Arvel said. That's why I created an underground city for my people to go to, Arvel said. But, Suthies said, Shambhala isn't really a city but she said. A tool, Arvel said. I know, Shambhala is also known as the Alquam, he said. Shambhala is supposed to be the other half of A3 and Petra is the underground city of Nabatea, Arvel said. Petra? She asked, as in my student? Queen of Brigid? She asked. No. Suthies said, Petra and Shambhala is a tool constructed by a great architect from Nabatea, Suthies said. After, Arvel said, an amazing architect that made 3 cities, he said. 3. She asked as he turned around as she scooted closer to him. She started tracing the scars on his abdomen as she waited for either Suthies and Arvel to continue. Shambhala, Petra, and Hegra, Suthies said, one was located in Xanadu, one is located on the north, and the one located on the deserts between what you now know as Fodlan's Locket and Almira, she said. Hegra is made a century later as a way to connect to Fodlan's neighbors to the east and also a gateway of sort for aspiring diplomats everywhere, Arvel said. She intercepted her hand and held it before kissing it, making her smile at him as she felt her anger dissipating. And then, Arvel said before his words become white noises in the background. She reached out to touch her cheek tenderly and started caressing her cheek, eliciting a giggle from her. They are both lost in their own worlds now. Before. Can you two please stop gallivanting with each other and listen for a second? Especially you, Byleth. Suthies said, we are speaking here. She said. Sorry, Suthies, she and She said as they turned their attention away from one another and towards Suthies and Arvel while still keeping their fingers intertwined with each other. You know what, Arvel said, forget it. You two get lost in your own world. He said. Come on, buddy, She said as he moved away from her. Tell us more, he said as he started to stand up. Nuh-uh, she said playfully as she pulled him back in the bed again. Your Grace, She said in a mocked stern tone as she wrapped her arms around him. What? She asked amusedly as she buried her face on his neck. She expected the smell of sex on him, but to her surprise, it was only the faint scent of that woman's perfume on him. I need to change, She said. In a bath, he said. She hummed in response. You Do need one, Sir Shay, she said. Shay faced her with a mock-offended look on his face. I have you know that I bathed earlier, Your Grace. He said with a gasp. How could you imply such a thing? Shay asked. Really? She asked. You don't believe me? Shay asked with a raised eyebrow. No. She said. Well, then, Shay said, I might just have to, Shay said as he suddenly pushed her on her back. Convince you? He said. Take this. Death by tickling. Shay said as he started tickling her. Stop it. She squealed as Shay assaulted her most ticklish part. She wheezed out. Fine, I surrender. She managed to say. Shay stopped his tickling assault on her and hovered over her, his arm over her head and his other intertwining their fingers together. State your surrender, he said with a soft chuckle. I will acknowledge that you did bathe and will not dispute your claim over the fact, she said. Good, Shay said as he let out a soft laugh while he pushed his forehead over hers. She mimicked his action and laughed alongside him. She closed her eyes as she caressed his cheek while she played with his hand on the other. Your Grace, Shay said. Yes. She asked as she opened her eyes and met his. Shay said. Yes. She asked as she reached out to him and caressed his cheek. The truth is, Shay said, I couldn't lay with another, he said. She gave me the information when she realized that I cannot perform well, Shay said. Why? She asked as she felt relief flooded her chest. Shay said, I kept thinking of the person I like, or at least held fond feelings for, he said. And just like that her heart suddenly dropped. He liked someone. Why you, she tried to say, but her throat is suddenly lodged with some sort of a lump, preventing her from asking the question. You have someone you like? She asked as she felt each words, each syllables pierced her very being. Shay nods. It's only been a while, but I feel happy whenever I'm with her and I love spending time with her, he said with a soft smile as her heart plummeted even further down at the sight of the smile that she deemed as hers. Her ears are ringing at that, but, this is. She tried to swallow the lump in her throat as Shay got off her. Well, now that I have your surrender, Shay said with a smile, my bath awaits me, he announced before he stand up and walked towards the bathroom, leaving her with a new emotion. This one is painful, this one is terrifying. This one filled her whole being, the desire to tear whoever this woman is, tear her apart and throw her to the wolves for even thinking that she can take him away from her, and something inside her keeps screaming at her to claim him, mark him, make him beg, ruin him. She tried to calm it down but to no avail, it just won't go away. Chapter 53, 46.1, Harp-String Moon, Rebellion of the Foolish Seven. So, we are still going to the opera, huh? Shay said as they entered the opera house. Apparently, she said as she managed to spot some well-dressed men and women entered the opera house, but this time, she said, we'll make an arrest, she said. Shay nods in understanding. I'm with you, Your Grace, he said. So, she said. What? Shay asked as they showed their tickets to the clerks. Who is this woman? She asked, trying to contain this unknown and disgusting feeling she have. You know, the one you have feelings for? She asked. That's Shay said as he looked her in the eyes. What? She asked, hoping that he says that either her or that was a joke. Shay suddenly put his hand on top of her head. That's a secret, Your Grace, he said softly. Not even a hint? She asked. Shay looked at her again. No, he said. And why not? She asked. You are too smart, Shay said. And what does have anything to do with this? She asked. And thank you, she said. Always a pleasure to please you, milady, she said. She hummed in amusement as a response. I'll keep that in mind for future use, Sir she said. And that's exactly what she did years later, but that's a story for another time. So, have been to the opera as of late? She asked as she took her seat behind the two men. I haven't, she said. Not even when you are doing a job? She asked. I refused to come whenever it was an opera, she said. I'll let Getz have a go at it, he said. And she asked. Whenever Letts and me asked him what the play is about, she said, he just told us, he said, clearing his throat. How should I know? I slept halfway through the first dialogue. He said, imitating his former comrade's voice. What y'd expect? She said. Wow, she just managed to say. I take it that you, Letts, and Getz are not a big fan of opera, she said. Well, Letts love the opera but Getz doesn't, she said. Why? She asked. Because Letts's mother used to be diva and she have dreamed of becoming a diva someday to follow her mother's steps, but circumstances are, she ended up picking up arms instead, she said. Not that she have a choice in the matter, he said. And Getz, she said. Well, Getz used to have a lover and well, he said. I'll tell you some other time about Getz, he said. I'll be waiting for it then, she said as she leaned her head on his shoulder. Then, what about you? She asked as they waited for Dorothea's signal as she started playing with his hand again. What about me? She asked. Why don't you like the opera? She asked. Because it reminds me of my stepmother, she said. Oh. She said curiously. She used to take me to Inver whenever this opera company is in town. Even if I don't like em, I still went in one just because she looks so stunningly beautiful, having such a lovely smile, and I love it whenever I see the woman I love my whole life smile, she said softly. That's why I always go with her, he said. Because you love her smile? She asked. Yes, she said. The memories I have with her is the only thing that kept me moving during my years as a mercenary, a reminder to myself that I can't die yet. Not when the woman I called mother helped me lived, he said. But the opera are a different story, she said. Why is that? She asked. Just thinking that she won't be able to see another one made me sad, she said. And he said with a forlorn sigh. And she asked as she lifted her head from his shoulder and looked at him. It's a reminder of what I couldn't achieve, my failures in life, she said. Failures? She asked. Remember when I said that she would have wanted me to be a poet or an author? She asked. She nods. Well, my dream is to write the greatest stage play for her, she said. Fulfill her lifelong dream of becoming a famous author or playwright, he said. Some son I'm, he scoffed bitterly. Instead of the pen, I picked up a sword. I could have been something else, but no. I become a sellsword instead, she said. A nobody that no one would remember, but a pile of body to be thrown in the battlefield, he said. But if you indeed become an author or a poet, then, she said, we would have never met one another, she said. Well, I met you by chance, she said. What's to say that I wouldn't in another life? He asked. She hummed thoughtfully. She often wondered too. What would be life if her father didn't flee from the monastery, or she didn't die at birth and she and her mother survived? Where would she be now? Knowing her grandmother, her mother would have been archbishop and she would have been heir to her. Maybe she would be a nun first and studying under tutelage of Seth, or maybe a student. No matter. This is the present. Thinking about the ifs of another life would be pointless. She looked at Shay in the eyes. Besides, she meets so many wonderful people in her life, and what if in that life, she never met Shay? But somehow she knows that no matter what life they ended up living in, Shay would still find her, and she would have met him regardless because she would have found him too. I say that we are always fated to meet, she said. One way or another, we would have found each other no matter what, she stated. Isn't that a bit too romantic, milady? Shay asked with an amused chuckle. If you look at it that way then yes, she said as the opera house slow went dark, indicating that it's about time it started. It is a bit romantic, she said. I didn't peg you for a romantic type, Shay said. I do my best, she said as she lay her head on his shoulder once more, relaxing and enjoying the warmth he is emanating and the comfort that only he can provide her in this world of conflict and hardship. Before her ears picked something up. So, what now? The man too rose away from her, asked his companion. It seems like they are ready to move anytime. All we have to do is signal our army to attack the equestrian manor, his companion said. And we have to make a move now, especially since we don't know the whereabouts of the archbishop, the other man said as the curtain raised, revealing Dorothea in an elegant garb of some princess from the stories of yore, or more specifically, back when Fodlan is still called Great Adrestia. Then, shall we make our mo dash, the man said as the kingdom's knights and her knights burst through every doors and every nook and cranny of the opera house. Halt! Alois! Screamed as every member of the audience pointed their weapons towards the men. In the name of the king and of the archbishop, you are under arrest. Alois said. The two men backed away but was stopped by her shooting a white flame over their head. Hello, she said, still pointing her finger, which is still have the tiny white torch in front of it. I say that you two surrender as obediently and as nicely as possible, she said. Or what? The nobleman asked. Well, you have two options, she said. First one is to surrender and we'll let you off easy, and the other is, she said as she looked at white flame in front of her finger. You can guess, she said. Be burned or be humiliated, huh? The other nobleman asked. It is what it is, she said. The other nobleman is about to pull out a grimoire when cast, and you'll find out how many people are devoted to the archbishop and to the king, and how many are willing to depend them in order to keep this peace we have obtained, Dorothea warned as she have her own spell already cast and at the ready. Still wanted to duel this out? She asked as Shay stood up beside her, sword summoned and at the ready. He is game, she said, pointing to Shay. You are not the one dueling him? Shay asked. I'm not the one with the magic sword, and definitely not with the magic repellent ring, she said. You win this round, Shay said. Again, she added. Don't you be cheeky on me now, your grace, Shay said. Me? She asked. Get cheeky on you? She asked in mock surprise. Never, she said. Whatever you say, Shay said as he turned his attention back to the man. Well, what do you say? She asked. Will you attempt to duel one of my best knights and also my personal knight, or you will surrender, she said. That scrawny excuse of a knight? The nobleman asked with a slight chuckle. Hey, Shay said. Yes, that scrawny excuse of a knight, she said briefly, pointing to Shay. Hey, Shay said again in offense. But he is scrawny enough to beat your ass, she said. I'm crying over here, Shay said before they both heard the Knight of Siros chuckled. Dorothea shot her a look that told her to tell her all the juicy gossip, or some she didn't already know. It's all right, laddie, Alois said, who seems to materialize beside him. We all think you are strong despite your rather lanky frame, Alois said as he put a hand on his shoulder. The Knight of Siros, Arvel, and Suthies hummed in agreement. Whose side are you on anyways? Shay exclaimed. Your decision? She asked. The nobleman fired the spell he cast. Thought so, she muttered as time shattered before her and rearranged themselves once more before it continue. She fired the spell towards the head of one of the noblemen, setting him on fire instantly, shocking those around her. I need only one of you alive, anyway, she said as she pointed her finger on the remain man. Would you kindly surrender? She asked politely to the still shocked nobleman, signaling the knights to arrest the man. Good, she said as the knights took the man away. So, Shay said after a moment of silence, the other man didn't surrender, he said. He did not, she said with a nod. So, you felt that, huh? She said. Yes, she said with a nod. It felt like something just shattered before me and then reconstructed again. I don't know, he said. Well, yes, she guessed that time literally shattered before her whenever she activated the spell, but she didn't expect him to give her a somehow accurate description of it. Magical sensitivity, huh? Suthies said. What is that? She asked. A type of ability only a few can have, Suthies said. The last individuals that I can remember that have that are the three pillars of the god, Suthies said, or simply as the three founders of Rephamer, she said. The three pillars, she thought. They are a group of Agarthans with a certain goal in mind, but that goal has been rendered void when I defeated Epimans 3 millennia ago, and their leader have been banished from this world, Suthies said. So, there is another organization in Agartha aside from those who slithers in the dark? She asked. Yes, Suthies said, but don't lump Rephamer with those heathens, she said. And why? She asked. Because Rephamer is not on the same level as those 10 sages. Rephamer is much dangerous, much powerful than them, Suthies said. She is starting worry about this other organization. If those slitherers is already giving her an headache, what's more to the other organization that Suthies, the progenitor god of Fodlan, is telling her to be worried about. As long as you leave them alone, they will leave you alone, Suthies said. Well, she will be sure to take that to mind. Well, should we head to the Imperial Palace, Your Grace? She asked. Yes, she said with a nod. Let's go, she said. She'll worry about Rephamer later. She have those slitherers to smoke out and wiped out. Chapter 54, 46.1, Harpstring Moon, Rebellion of the Foolish Seven. He took in the beautiful and exquisite landscape of Aegir as he stood in one of the higher hills overlooking both Burgles and Aegir territories. The warm breeze of Harpstring Moon weaved through his hair softly as he took in the rich golden fields in Burgles and the green valleys of Aegir. Maybe he should take Byleth here for a camping trip, or maybe take her to take a dip in the ocean, and maybe fish with her when things settled down, but for now, he should focus on quelling this stupid rebellion by those power-hungry nobles. Ah! Someone said behind him as he reviewed the map. You must be that rumored mercenary that Her Grace have found in the woods, the man said, long hair swaying in the winds and holding himself with such an air of elegance and authority that he can't help but admire the man before him. So elegant and so majestic, a noble of all noble. I heard that you saved her from those ruffians. The man said with a hearty laugh. He bowed without knowing who this man is, but in his book, he certainly earned his respect. It is a pleasure to meet you, my lord, he said. Please, the nobleman said. Call me Ferdinand, he said. I'm Duke Aegir, Ferdinand von Aegir. Ferdinand said proudly. Nice to meet you, Lord Aegir, he said with a slight and amused smile. And whom might I have the pleasure of conversing with? Ferdinand asked. She, a member of the Knight of Siros and Her Grace's bodyguard, he said, quite ashamed that he can't introduce himself with a surname since he don't know if he even have one to begin with. An honor to meet you, Duke Aegir, he said as he bowed. Ferdinand nods. Well, then, he said, might I ask you to debrief me of our plan of attack? Ferdinand asked. It would be my pleasure, Lord Aegir, he said. Please, Ferdinand said. There is no need for formalities and such stifling titles between us. You have saved Her Grace, and for that, you have earned my respect and friendship, he said. Call me Ferdinand, Ferdinand said with a hearty laugh. I will, he said. Sir Ferdinand, he said. No need for titles, Ferdinand said. Just plain old Ferdinand is fine by me, he said. It's disrespectful, my lord, he said. Nonsense, Ferdinand said. Those who protected Her Grace is always considered a friend of mine, he said. And if she made you her bodyguard, then she must have trusted you a great deal, Ferdinand said. I guess, So he said. Now that is settled and all, Ferdinand said, how about we proceed with the debriefing? He asked. Of course, he said as he led Ferdinand to the war tent. Nervous, laddie? Alois asked as they both overlook the valley from hill and seeing hundreds upon hundreds of armies at the ready while both of them are mounted on their respective steeds. Well, consider the events from the last 2 weeks and a half, it's hard to be nervous about anything anymore, he said. Well, anything that is not involving the Archbishop, Arvel said. Well, she is important, he stated. To you or to Fodlan? Arvel asked. Both, he said. Considering she is my employer, he said. Whatever you say, Arvel said. What do you think, Captain? He asked. I say that you have a personal reason to keep her grace safe, Alois said as he patted his horse. The other knights hummed in agreement. He felt his cheek heating up. No, he exclaimed. I'm wrong. Alois asked. I wasn't asking about that, I was asking about our situation. He exclaimed. Oh, Alois said. I say it was good, he said. But we don't hear any denial about Captain's opinion in regards of your thoughts about her grace, another knight remark. Focus, he said. The rest of the knights just chuckled. Circe, Ingrid called out to him. Yes, Lady Galatea, he asked as Ingrid floated in front of them, her weapon Lewin in her hand. Are you sure that this will work? Ingrid asked. Yes, he said, though her grace have told us that the enemies have no plan to diverge from what they initially have in mind, he said. What's to say that they won't change their mind when one of their men was burnt to crisp? He asked. That is a good point, Ingrid said. It's for the best, he said. Better have a backup plan just in case, he said. Because you are a man with a plan, Arvel said. Hey, living in the wilderness for so long is bound to beat some tactical sense to some person, he said. And in your case, it took meeting the Archbishop to beat some tactical sense into you or any sense at all, Arvel said. Shut up, he said. I'm only stating the truth, Arvel said. Anyway, he said, we better get ready, he said as he sensed some sort of spell. We have another enemy coming, he said. How did you know that, laddie? Alois asked. I can sense a strong magical presence somewhere, he said. Yes, Arvel said, from what I can tell you, he said. Agar then, he muttered. You are getting better at sensing this type of things, Arvel said, and within just a week too. Arvel said. Well, I have to since she is relying on me to sense any unusual spells, he said. Ingrid simply smiled at that statement. Professor must be very special to you, she noted. Quite so, he said softly, so softly that he doubted that the Lady of Galatea have heard it. Anyways, we better tread carefully since their allies seems to have some sort of an advance weapon against us, he said. All right, laddie, Alois said. If her grace trust your words then, we will trust you as well, he said. He nods. All right, we better get into formation, he said. Lady Galatea, I'm counting on you and your flyers for air support, he said. You have us, Ingrid said. Thank you, he said before Ingrid flew off. All right, he said to Alois. Ready when you are, Captain, he said. Throughout his life, all he have known is fighting in a battlefield, and when it comes to going to countless skirmishes is seeing the lands be dyed red with blood, and this one is no exception. As he impaled a mercenary in the chest with his killer lance, the unknown man's blood splattered behind him as his lance exited on his back. The man looked at him for a while as he struggled to breath, coughing up blood as he attempted to curse him before his eyes rolled in the back of his head. He took out his lance out of the flesh husk before he rode off to a horde of mercenary coming his way. With a swing of his lance, heads started flying off and blood raining on him as he took their lives in a flash. All for the sake of preventing more bloodshed, he have to shed blood to maintain this fragile peace that Fodlan have finally found. And if it meant that it will keep his mistress away from another war, from another bloodshed, then he will shed them himself. As long as it meant that Byleth will be safe. And so, he rushed headfirst into another horde of mercenary, running through the volley of arrows, ignoring the pain that shot through his shoulders and his back as several arrows hit him just before he managed to use Shadow Flash. Seeing the space between him and the archers compressed so swiftly, his beloved steed stood on his hind legs in either confusion or fear as the light dissipated around them. To his enemies, he might have looked like an ungodly omen of doom as the purple light bathed him while he have his lance on the air, ready to strike his foe as his steed stood on its hind legs, white armor covered in the blood of the foes that dare threaten the woman he swore his servitude to. And that was probably what they saw before he chopped their heads off as he swings his lance. A demon, a herald of misfortune. Guess he is not so different from that woman. But the only difference between her and him is that he have found someone he would protect, someone he would treasure and cherish as long as he is alive, his one and only reason for living. And he will not lose it, not to these fools and definitely not to anyone. That's his thought as he stabbed someone in the chest again. For her, he will kill as many if it meant that she will live in peace for all her days. He saw several footmen coming towards the soldiers. They have a lot of footmen, Ferdinand said. That will be a huge disadvantage for the cavalries and the archers, he said. Then, we utilized the knights, he said. Are you nuts, laddie? Alois asked. No, he said. I just thought that if we surround and divide the battalions of footmen they have, then they are easy picking for the knights, he said. And how do you suggest we do that? Commander asked. Right, he said as he sent a signal across the battlefield in a form of a single flaming arrows. We form a wall surrounding each divided battalions, he said as he moved the armored knights and arranged them in a form of circles around the footmen and soldiers. With that, even their swords won't be able to penetrate the shields of the knights and the armored knights won't be harmed with the volleys of arrows that will rain upon the rebels' army, he said. And how so? Ferdinand asked. The soldiers retreated as the knights slowly gets into formation, and slowly but surely they started to separate all of the battalions of soldiers and mercenaries the rebels' army have and started to form a circle around them. As soon as he is sure that everything is in place, he signaled another arrow for the knights to shield up and the archers to get ready to fire, and when he is sure everything is ready, he fired another arrow to signal the archers to fire as soon as Ingrid gave him a signal that everyone is safe. And with that, the sun was blotted out as the archers fired their arrows, killing every enemy they have on sight, effectively snuffing out half of the rebels' force. A very efficient way to end this fighting without losing anyone. He nudged his horse to move forwards and pursue the retreating forces, and hopefully, Ingrid and her knights managed to snuff out the fleeing Agarthans. He closed the eyes of a fallen mercenary and gave a short prayers for him to find peace. Quite a battle, huh? Ferdinand said as he looked over the blood-stained field. It is, he said, but it is necessary to keep the peace that you and everyone have fought for, he said. I know, Ferdinand said. I might revile them as traitors, and I don't honor those who points their blades towards His Majesty and especially towards Her Grace, but, he said before taking a deep breath. But, what? He asked. When will this end? Ferdinand asked. When will we be able to finally reach true peace? When will this bloodshed end? He asked. When everyone have agreed on a mutual agreement, and when everyone would submit to the laws, and when everyone started accepting one another again, and when everyone stopped soughting their own selfish desire and compromise with one another, he said. Ferdinand hummed thoughtfully. Well, for now they have kept peace for a while longer, but he knows. Both him and Byleth still have a lot of battles to fight from now on, but he will revere at the fact that he managed to fight for the peace she helped gained. Anyway, we should have your wounds patched up since we don't want Her Grace to throw a fit if she saw you injured, Ferdinand said. He nods in agreement and followed Ferdinand to the medic tent. She smiled as she read a report from Alois about Shay's valor and deeds during the fighting. Didn't peg him to a tactical type, but he somehow surprised me, she said. Suthies just hummed in agreement. Chapter 55, Wyvern Moon. Why? He muttered as he held his forehead in his palm as he rode beside the Archbishop's carriage. You should ask yourself that, Byleth said through the open window, letting the warm winds of Wyvern Moon inside her carriage. I'm not the one who instigated this whole thing, she said. But you encourage it, he said blankly. What? Byleth asked. I found it entertaining, she said. So, watching me scrambling around the battlefield while the students of the academy ganged up on me with a barrage of javelins, spears, swords, arrows, and all kind of spells is entertaining for you? He asked as he summarized what he remembered from the mock battle back in Great Tree Moon, which is a flurry of weapons being thrusted towards him, being swung towards him being a moving target for both arrows and spells. Byleth looked thoughtful for a while. Pretty much, she said. Glad I can entertain you, Your Grace, he said with a groan. And you done quite splendidly so, Byleth said with a giggle. He just gave her a blank look. Next time, try not to get lost, all right, Byleth said. Duly noted, Your Grace, he said. You better not let me down, twerp, Suthies said. I know, he said with a sigh. I'm just saying that you have my blessings and I believe in you. So, prevail in this event as you always do, twerp, Suthies said as the pendant floated near Byleth's face. You are only saying that because you have a lot of money coming in when I won, he said. I certainly did not. Suthies said, sounding offended that he dared doubt her faith in him. I bet on you because I believe in you, she said. I swear it on the blood that flows inside Gautier, Suthies said. That kind'll lose its sincerity, Suthies, he said with a sigh. You really hate him, huh? Arvel said. He gave me a headache to last me a lifetime, Suthies said with a groan. Especially that Bloomers incident. Arvel asked. Exactly the Bloomers incident. Suthies said in exasperation. You never did told me about the Bloomers incident, he said as he turned his attention towards the pendant. What is the Bloomers incident? Byleth asked as she turned her eyes towards the floating pendant. Well, Suthies said, I'll tell you later, she said. He nods. Anyway, he said before turning his attention on the pocket watch. Would it have hurt you to actually bet on me, Arvel? He asked. I was trying to prove a point, Arvel said. Explain, he said. Everyone expected me to bet on you just because you are my vessel, but I have a point to prove, damn it, Arvel said. Does this make sense to you, Your Grace? He asked. Not one bit, Byleth said. Oh, well, he said with a shrug of his shoulders. Well, everything Epimans do is probably quite pointless anyway, Suthies said with a sigh as small puff of air came out of the pendant. At least I wasn't the one who can do anything but still ends up being the dumbest woman that ever existed, Arvel said. What the hell did you say? Suthies screamed, making Byleth flinch a little since Suthies is so close to her ear. Exactly what I say, Arvel said. You okay? He asked as he ignored Suthies and Arvel arguing in the background. Suthies just hurt my ear, but I'm fine, Byleth said as she sat up straight while she ignored both Arvel and Suthies. Don't want you hurting your cute little ears, he said as he reached out and softly pinched her ear. Byleth swat his hand away with a giggle. Stop that, she said. You know my ears are my most sensitive body part as of late, she said as she covered her ear. And that's why it's fun to touch them once in a while, he said with a laugh. Byleth just gave him a glare. You know that I find your glares quite adorable, Your Grace, he said. You can't intimidate me with those, he said. You are always scared of my glares, Byleth said. At first, but seeing it so often kinda lose its effect, he said. Oh. Byleth said with an amused raise of her eyebrow. I do remember you almost wetting your pants last week when I glared at you, she said. That was just dud. He said. I wasn't really scared. He retorted. Then, why are you so defensive? Byleth asked amusedly. The knights looked blankly as they listened to their archbishop and her knight continue to bicker at one another while throwing some of the most flirtatious and vomit-inducing sweet words at one another, making their bickering into a more playful and flirtatious bantering, and the knights as a whole thought of one thing collectively. Just get together already. So, Byleth asked as she entered his tent. Nervous? She asked as she sat down on his cot. Not at all, he said as he checked if he have the right gears for this. No real weapon and stuff. Confident, are we? Byleth said. I was just excited to see the fruits of their labor all year, he said. Plus, I have a goddess to please, he said, looking over at the pendant hanging on her neck. Damn right, twerp. Suthies said. And now, I have to think of a way to stop another war from erupting, since some might think that I'm robbing my own employee of their money, Byleth said with a sigh. It wasn't robbing if it was earned by a bet, girly, Arvel said. Great, Byleth said. Now, everyone in Fodlan will know that the Archbishop, the one who should be morally clean as any beings on earth, is running a gambling den in the monastery, she said. It wasn't gambling if it was Suthi's fault either, Arvel said. Arvel did have a point, he said. Now, Fodlan will know that their goddess have the tendency to gamble, Byleth said. Oh, joy, she said. Complain and complain. Just lighten up a bit, why won't you? Suthies said as the pendant bounced up and down while it emits small smokes. Sure, Byleth said. One sure is enough. Suthies said. Sure, Byleth said. Don't you patronize me? Suthies said as the pendant bounced all over the place as more smokes came out of it. Sir Shay? Your Grace. A knight called out from outside the tent. Yes. Byleth replied. It is time, the knight said. We'll be there in a while, Byleth said. Thank you for reminding us, she said. A pleasure, Your Grace, the knight said before he left. Well, Byleth said as she stood up. Best of luck, and I don't want to see any bruises on you, she said. As you wish, Your Grace, he said with a chuckle. And don't hurt the little ones too badly, all right? Byleth said. Yes, Your Grace, he said. Byleth nods, satisfied with his answer. Then, I'll be out of your hair, she said as she swept the flap of his tent aside. I'll see you later. Byleth asked. As always, he said as he stood up, satisfied with his preparation. I'm yours after, Your Grace, he said. Byleth didn't say anything for a moment. Good luck out there, she said. I always am, he said with a bow. As the trumpet heralding the beginning of the Battle of Eagle and Lions ended, spells, and even catapults was fired towards her hapless knight. That, she said as she blinked in surprise. That was fast, she said in amusement, knowing that spells is useless against Shay, but physical attacks is another story. What the hell? Shay! Shout resounding throughout Gronder Field. A catapult! He exclaimer, that wasn't fair, he said. Everything is fair in love and war, the Blue Lion's house leader stated as she signaled their siege weapon to be ready. And we will use every arsenal we have to win against one of the strongest knights, the Black Eagle's house leader stated as he signaled his mages to be ready. And with our unity, we will against you, the Golden Deer's house leader said as he signaled his archers to get ready. Fire! The three leaders shouted. Well, she asked Seath as she watched every offensive she can name was thrown towards Shay, who is running across the battlefield, dodging and throwing whatever attacks he have. What do you think? She asked. I say, Seath said, it's entertaining to watch, he said. Go get them, twerp. Suthies. Screamed as Flane holds her by the necklace. Go beat him, everyone. Flane. Cheered. The knights cheered even loudly as the students chased Shay around with swords, axes, and lances while firing arrows and boulders towards him, not counting the spells since the ring of Andovri dispelled everything anyway. And she can't even cheer for him since she is the archbishop and she isn't supposed to openly show any favoritism. That's it. Shay exclaimed, no more nice knight. He said as he draws his sword. That's my man, she muttered under her breath with an amused smile on her lips. Come at me. Shay shouted, and he was met with a flurry of arrows which he parried as he charged head first towards the army of students and knights while the ring of Andovri dispelled any spell that come into the perimeter of the barrier. He parried and blocked attacks after attacks, all the while delivering counters after counters. Frankly speaking, she is impressed, but there never been anything about him that she wasn't impressed with anyway. Whether it was his uncanny luck to attract trouble or his uncanny luck getting out of it. Yes. Go all out, twerp. Suthies. Cheered as the pendant bounced up and down in excitement. No, beat him, everyone. Flane shouted as Shay demolished every students and battalions with ease and precision. Well, she said to Seath, I guess the goddess will be pleased with every offering you have offered her, she said as Shay finished dealing with the students and is now making a quick work towards the house leaders, and as soon as she saw the house leaders on their knees, she raised her hands up. And this year's winner is, Seath, said Sir Shay. Seath announced. Shay just looked over her way and waved at her with a huge smile on his face. No bruises, your grace, he said to her. Suthies hummed in delight as she floated over the bags of coins. I assumed you are happy with your earnings, Arvel said with a sigh. As a matter of fact, I'm elated. Suthies said, betting on the twerp is a right choice, she said. Arvel was quiet for a moment. What's on your mind, Epimans? Suthies asked. Just thinking of how much you are trusting Shay with Byleth now, Arvel said. Suthies was quiet for a while as she come back down to the table. My great-granddaughter is a grown woman and she make her own choice on who to spend her life with, Suthies said. Even if I'm quite opposed to it, there is nothing I can do about, she said. You know what I'm talking about, right? Suthies said. Bridge builder, Epimans, she said. A man with hair as dark as the night sky and eyes sparkling like sapphire came to mind. Anubis, Arvel muttered bitterly. Right, Suthies said softly. My dearly beloved, my whole heart, my dearest Anubis, she said softly. And Arvel can hear a tinge of dark obsession combined with the soft and gentle love in Suthies' voice. You know what it is, Suthies said. Yes, Arvel said. After all, there is none a lover that can love so deeply, so darkly, and so devotedly as those from Nabatea. He can only pray for his vessel. Once a Nabatean decided that they wanted to spend their life with someone, they'll sink their claws into them and never let go. Why did you suggest them to leave us here, anyway? Arvel asked. They deserved to be alone once in a while, Suthies said. I can smell an ulterior motive, Arvel said. I just thought that it's high time Byleth admits her feelings to him, and it's high time your vessel come clean to her, Suthies said. And what makes you think that one of them will own up to the fact that they have feelings to one another? Arvel asked. My great-granddaughter have already accepted the fact that she is indeed in love with the twerp, but the twerp is still in denial about his, Suthies said softly. You know why, Arvel said softly. His position and his duty towards Byleth, Suthies said. Arvel just sighed. Of course he knows. Shay isn't making it a secret, at least for Arvel that is. The palpable longing, the burning desire to be with Byleth, and the self-doubt inside his heart as he wonders if he is worthy enough for Byleth, or the ceaseless wondering whether the looks of adoration and love that Byleth shewed his way is an illusion his suffering mind have made, or was it real? Well, knowing your vessel's tendency to set the right mood, Suthies said, it's only a matter of whether or not either Byleth or Shay take the leap of faith in this one is up to them, she said. Hopefully, both of them isn't as dense as we thought them to be, Arvel said. She smiled as soon as she saw Shay sitting on the ledges at the top of the goddess tower, looking up the night ski and admiring the billions and billions of diamonds adorning the night ski, his back from her and him dressed in a simple tunic and a leather waistcoat, cotton pants, and black boot, armor absent for once. Hello, Your Grace, Shay said. Nice night for us to steal away, huh? He said. Mind joining me, Your Grace? He asked as he looked at her. You know I wouldn't refuse an invitation from you, Sir Shay, she said as she climbs over the ledge before Shay held out his hand to help her and to make sure she is stable to stand and move before she sat down beside him. Shay just smiled at her. Growing weary of the festivities, she asked. A little, Shay said. I'm not really into parties like this, but I do love the food, he said. Same here, she said as she leaned on his shoulder and admired the view on top of the goddess tower. Beautiful, isn't it? She said as she admired the lights on the towns below as though imitating the stars overhead. Yes, Shay said. I usually come here when I can't sleep, he said. You do know that it's forbidden to come here? She asked. I'm the Archbishop's personal knight, Shay said as he leaned his head on top hers. Maybe I can be granted leverage for being here unwarranted, he said. Of course, she said. And a comfortable silence enveloped them for a while. Do you ever regret it? She asked. What? Shay asked. She lifted her head from his shoulder. Meeting me? She asked. Becoming a knight? She asked. And why would I regret that? Shay asked as he met her eyes. Because I have chained you down to one place and I might have limited your freedom, she said. Admit it, she said. You miss traveling all over Fodlan, she said. Shay was quiet for a moment. I might miss traveling all over Fodlan and I might be chained to one place because of my new job, Shay said. But, she asked. My life is astronomically much better comparing to the one I used to live, Shay said. How so? She asked as she gazed upon his profile and she took her time appreciating how the night sky is reflected into his eyes. Back then, I have no purpose in life, Shay said, wandering about and just going with where the winds is going to take me, he said. Before he meet her eyes, before you came into my life, Shay said, my life is nothing but a series of monotony and ceaseless search for my purpose and the place I can call home, he said. But now, Shay said before smiling to her. And what a smile it was, as though he have cast a spell on her. She is instantly mesmerized and spellbound by his enchantingly beautiful smile. The way his eyes softened and how it lights up in a happy light made her heart skip a beat before it quickened its pace. She wondered how can a simple smile captivate her so. I have found you, Shay said. I know my place is by your side and nothing in the world can make me happy than spending all of my days by your side, he said, because it is you who have painted my world in a brand new light and have brought color to my monotonous days, Shay said. Thank you, Byleth, he said softly as he pressed his forehead on hers. She looked away to hide away her reddening face as she felt her heart beating rapidly. How should she respond to that? There is a lot of things she wanted to say to him. Wait, isn't this a perfect time to confess to him? Tell him how she really feel about him, tell him of her fear of someone being with him that wasn't her, tell him of her desires to be with him and to act on her feelings without the fear of rejection. Tell him how happy he made her and how he means the world to her. Shay, she started as she swallowed the lump that was lodged in her throat while she gathered and steeled her courage. She said as she took a deep breath. I'm happy too, she said. I'm happy with each day I spent with you and I don't know how to put it into words, she said, but I know that it was only with you that I felt this happiness, she said. That's why, she said as she tried to calm her beating heart. What I mean to say is that, from the very bottom of my heart, she said as she took another deep breath. I love you, she said, and I meant every word and every letter, she said as she waited for his reply. And she continued to wait as his agonizing silence continues, and she is starting to feel the dread and the fear inside her heart. What if he doesn't feel the same as her? What if she effectively ruin what they have just because she can't handle this agonizing and endless suffering of wondering if he felt the same way as her? Hiding this feeling from him. Please say something, Shay, she pleaded. If you are going to reject me, then say so, she said. Just don't leave me hanging in the dark any longer, she pleaded. But when she heard no answer, she took up the courage to look beside her, and steeling herself to see the apologetic and almost agonized look in his eyes as he voiced out his rejection of her love. Only to see him sleeping. She can only look blankly at the sleeping man beside her and started to decide whether or not she should curse or thank her luck. Just when she is pouring her heart out and is confessing her love to him, he decided to sleep. Wait, maybe this is a good thing. She wouldn't ruin what they have if he is asleep while she let this out of her chest. It doesn't make sense, but somehow it is a sound logic for her. Yeah, this is good. Pouring her heart out, confessing to him and almost having an arrhythmia only to find out her confession went unheard is a good thing. Shay awoken suddenly. Did I miss something, Your Grace? He asked. And she can't help but scream internally at the question. On the hidden corner of the tower, Flane and Manuela is screaming internally at the dumb luck Byleth have. Check the description for the links to the author.